I think we can start. There's like 1 minute after 7, so and there's some people are already here, so we can start. I think.
Hi everyone.
Yeah. Hello. So this is the panel without the moderator. So I think we hoped that it would be more of a Q&A between the panelists and people watching. So if you have any questions in the meantime or at the end, feel free to ask them either out loud or in the chat, because I believe we all see the chat right now.
Yes.
Yep.
So I would like to make a question just to start it out. So I think Loe, Zuzanna, and mulitikulturalny, right? I heard that you are involved in some projects about queer literature. So you tell me about it. I'm all ears. I would like to know more about it.
Well, I think you should start because you are like the person behind all of this.
Oh no! That's okay. So I was one of the main editors of the queer literature anthology in Poland. Not the first one. First, there were also lesbian literature anthologies, I believe, but to connect the fantasy and the queer part, I think it was the first one. It was published under the Alpaca publishing group. So it's like a non-profit project for people to learn about editing and translating and writing too, and how the publishing world works, basically. Yeah, so we already published the first edition of that, and we are currently working on the second one. We've got some texts that we are currently reading and selecting, and yeah, we plan to publish it like in June, I believe. So the Pride month, as it was with the first one. So this is in the works. What more today?
And how did it work? So did you open like submission period and everybody sent? Did you invite people?
Yeah, but basically yes. The Alpaca group was formed from people vaguely from around the fantasy fandom, so fantasy and science fiction. So like people organizing conventions started it, basically. Then it escalated, obviously, but it was like we were the fantasy part. We've got covered by people like attending and organizing conventions here in Poland. So yeah, after the group gained some was a bit recognizable, we started the we asked if anyone would be interested, and like 3 months later we were covered in like over 100 of pieces of text and graphics and like everything basically. So it was bigger than anyone could have thought, I would think. And over 50 of the texts went into the anthology. So it's over 800 pages long. So that was a huge thing, and nobody expected that.
That's great. That's great.
Yeah, I believe we were really surprised by all the text and how huge the anthology at the end was, because 800 pages is like, oh my gosh, it's a huge book. And I don't believe that anyone except for like the editors was able to read it in like one sitting. But we didn't really had a choice. And it was amazing job.
Yeah, it was really hard, and it definitely wouldn't come to existence without people writing, basically. Like Zuzanna here, so Prelvian wrote one of the texts, and Sambor, mulitikulturalny, too, one of the essays. So and there were many more people that worked on that. Some of them even in our audience, I think. But yeah, you are seen. You are remembered for what you did.
No,
But yeah.
And I'm quite surprised. That's really good. So I also organized a small anthology, not with 800 pages, much less. Let me see, 120. So it's like a, a smaller one.
Yeah, but you had it like physically with you. We've got the ebook, and that's it basically. So but yes, I was about to ask you about that. So when was it? How did that go?
So it was pretty similar. We open a submission. People could submit texts, and then we read it and chose the ones that we thought that it were the best. Because we wanted to be as representative and inclusive as possible, we also asked the help of a queer blog in Portugal to read the book, to read the text, and to give their opinion. Because we wanted not to exclude any text because we were not culturally included in the type of story that was being told. And I can share a very horror story about this anthology. So most texts were really cool and really good, and it was cool because we didn't say LGBT, we say queer to make it as open as possible, and we receive all kind. And one of the things that we said in this anthology was, okay, we don't want to focus, and it was one of the things that we shared emails about. And this anthology, we didn't want to focus on the sad part of being part of the queer culture. So you can write a tragic story, and it will be accepted, but let's not make the whole anthology about tragic stories, because if you can invent a future, if you can invent a fantasy world, we can invent a fantasy world where queer people are accepted. So we want both stories. We want to have all kinds of stories. And we received a story, so this is the complete opposite. We received a story that was so out of touch with, so it was clearly a person that, one of the things that we say when you write something about a culture that you don't understand, try to find someone to read it and to give it an opinion about it. And that person didn't do that kind of exercise, and the text was horrifying for a person that would say, okay, this is how people outside of queer culture see what queer culture is. And that was also interesting, although it was like quite scary to read it. It was like, whoa, this person really needs to talk with queer people. It was also interesting to see what was the interpretation. And I would like to ask you, how was your experience with text? So all the texts, how did you receive it? It was, did you receive several kinds of queer culture, like asexual, lesbian, gays, transsexual characters? And if you receive stories from people that have a distorted view about queer culture.
Yeah, I mean, your experience sounds familiar, I would say. We didn't have as many texts. We didn't receive as many texts that would be touching like on different cultures, so to say. So we didn't have to find sensitivity readers for that. I think people focused on the either Polish legends or the Slavic mythology a bit more. If there were any cultures that were coming up specifically. But yeah, we received texts that were, we decided that we don't want the anthology to be of the sad experiences only. I'm thinking if there's any actually like text with negative or sad endings, for example. Nothing comes to mind for now, actually. Of course, there were texts that talked about that or weren't, very, very positive, like rainbows and flowers and everything. But we also wanted it, the whole anthology to be a bit uplifting for the whole, well, for people reading it, basically. Oh yeah, that's the one text that's not really optimistic. Yeah. But there were like how people did that like varied. So we also had texts that were set in our like universe, I would say. So local stories about cities in Poland. There are also texts about completely made up universes that were inherently queer on the level of world building. And that was also interesting, and how the different texts were perceived by the public. was pretty interesting. I think maybe the authors like read actually a bit more of the opinions of their friends, for example. So yeah, if you please tell us about that, because I mostly remember the not great like reviews of you know, right-wing people who weren't keen on the idea of like making fantasy queer and, you know, political, which wasn't a thing obviously, but that's what my memories like focus on. But
I think that there
Yeah.
was also one other similarity to the anthology Carlos is talking about. I think that there were completely misplaced and some offensive submissions written clearly by people who just didn't have the good knowledge, didn't have a good understanding of queer people in general, I think. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think there were such submissions also. But
Yeah, definitely. And we specifically asked for content warnings, for example, for the people, because like there were like 2 main editors, but also a few more people because of the amount of text we got. We asked a few more people to like read them and tell us their thoughts about that. And that's why we asked for example, content warnings in the emails with submissions, and people didn't do that. And there were really some surprising things, even in the first paragraph sometimes. So that was not great.
Yeah, well, I believe this anthology was first, well, maybe one of first that in Poland that used content warnings. So I presume that some authors just didn't really understand what they were supposed to do, so they just left it be. Just okay, I would skip that part, and they will read it anyway. Because it was such a novelty, but a really important novelty, I think, especially for the readers. And when it comes to the feedback from the audience, I also remember mostly those comments about this is too political, why you are making fantasy political, etc., etc. And I was like, okay, show me one fantasy book that's not political. I'm waiting.
Yeah, I think it's like the problem with Polish fandom specific. I'm not sure if like specifically, but it's a thing we talk about over and over, really, that to not make it like real long, we have this this thing where you talk to everyone, be it an author or another person just from fandom, just a regular, you know, with a name, not with honorifics, and a few more things that are pretty specific to our country, I would say, that are supposed to make everyone equal in the fandom. And I think not every person from the old Polish fandom understands that in the same way that we would like it to be understood. So making something about specifically queer people, something about equality, but a different kind, was not greatly appreciated by part of the fandom. it's of course not everyone. It's usually the older people that were participating in fandom in like 80s and earlier sometimes, but it's a problem that's coming up over and over. So
we have here some questions. Sorry, you were saying?
So I was reading more like a blogger or a writer, and not the editor, the reviews, and they were mostly positive because most of my friends are queer. So of course everybody was happy about that, and. Luckily, I wasn't too much on Facebook to see the hate that previously the speakers were saying about. So for me, it was a good reception. And yeah, we have a question, and also I'm also interested in the reception of your anthology in the queer community and outside of queer community, how it was.
So, like you said, it was a physical copy of the book, and it went to the general bookstores. So it was on the general bookstores, and people bought it. We received some. We didn't receive negative hating feedback, but I think it happens because Portugal is quite liberal in these kind of things. Although we are getting more and more right-wing politicians nowadays, and people are, I would say, coming out of the closet, of the right-wing closet. So people were like, I was reading here a comment of Magdalena, I think it's how you say it, Magdalena, about the Polish fandom was always free of politics because people who weren't on the right were sitting and just not laughing at the jokes. And I think here we have, of course, if you talk about my father and mother generation, they are a little bit more conservative, but I would say the 30-something, 40-something, 20-something years old generation in Portugal are much more liberal. And and for example, I'm laughing. One of the critics we received sometimes were the book was not queer enough. It needs to be more queer. They want it more more explicit, more focused on that. So it's funny. And the other side, we tried also to promote this book on LGBT communities, not communities, sorry, associations, but we didn't receive. We had very little welcoming. But I think that was not because of the initiative, but because it was a book, and people also don't read that much. There was a statistic that went this year that in Portugal, in average, there's one book for each person. Like people only read one book per year.
Yes, same here. To be honest, I think people from queer communities that are not interested in like reading fantasy books, especially, were just not interested, and we reached more of the fantasy fandom queer people than the other way around.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly, because we wanted to use the anthology to reach to more people outside of the fandom community, and that was really difficult for us.
I just love the comment about the anthology being not queer enough, because Magda wrote about this review made by Catholic video bloggers, and I remember because their review of my story made me laugh so hard because they quite enjoy it actually, and I was like, oh my god, what I did wrong. And the only negative comment was like, everything was destroyed by at the end because the main characters kissed, and I was like, oh my gosh, such a terrible thing to do.
They should kiss more. Next time I will put.
Yeah, because they should, like, slap each other's faces and then kiss. Like, enemies to lovers, not lovers to lovers.
Sometimes I like to be a little bit provocative on that side. Like I think there's some empowerment in writing these kind of stories. Like people are expecting one thing, and you give them another perspective, and I think that's good. And I especially love these kind of things when a reader doesn't know what is coming to and starts reading the story. I can give you a very good example. Story is not about specifically about the queer anthologies. So my father is a little bit conservative, uh, and he was reading a book and he was really liking it. He was like top of the top liking it. So, and he was talking about me, oh, this book is great, the writer is really good, etc., etc. And I said, oh, do you know who the writer is? No, who is? Oh, he's the husband of a politician that we have here in the parliament. And he was like, oh. And then he was like, oh, I was enjoying a work of art written by a gay guy, you know? And I think that's transformative because he was liking it, the book, and then he understand that the book was written by a gay guy, and I think something switched in his mind, like, oh, okay, I can like this without being gay. And I know this looks like a very, but I think that's one of the powers of fiction, because, like you said, Zuzanna, this blogger was reading your book, your story, was liking it, and then in the end, the characters kiss, and you're like, no, this was too much. But then I believe that that person will continue to have the story in his mind, and maybe he or she, I don't know, they will notice little details that you put on the story, that the characters were queer all along, and they will reflect on those details without wanting to. And I think that's the power of telling stories, because stories is a way for you to communicate directly inside other people's mind. And the funny thing is that the mind of that person absorbs your story and transforms it based on their own experiences in life. But at the same story, at the same time, the story changes how people see their experiences. So
Yeah,
it's quite
definitely.
powerful.
I agree with you so much, and that's the main reason why I love so much to write stories that takes place in more inclusive worlds. Like in most of my fantasy fiction, the worlds are completely inclusive with queer characters. It's like no homophobia, because I think it's not my narrative to tell those stories about pain and hatred, etc. I want to show that, okay, we are all people, and I'm telling about people. I'm not telling about the I'm telling about the identities, but not because I won't make you into that identity, but I want to show that it's normal. It's a living person.
And I think that connects with one question that we have here, more general for you all. That is, do you think an emphasis on uplifting stories in calls for these kind of submissions might technically discourage the queer creators for tackling more challenging / upsetting / difficult aspects of being queer in their stories. So do you think that when we ask something like, okay, you can write that all kinds of stories, but we want to have a diverse approaches, both more happy or non-homophobia worlds, for example, like you were saying, or really talking about things that are real, that is homophobia, that is discrimination. What do you think about this?
So I was reading a book that is called "I'm a Gay Wizard," and this is something with the boarding school for wizards. But both main characters were queer, and it was a bit upsetting at the beginning if you think about the plot or whatever happens to the characters because they were experiencing homophobia and transphobia specifically. They were abused by parents, or one of them was, but there was the topic of abuse by students, I think, and in family also. But in the end, I think, at least for me, it was more of the uplifting because, well, yeah, it's magic. They managed to overcome a lot of things. They did succeed in saving themselves, let's say. So I don't want to spoil it too much. And so yeah, there were a lot of successes, and even if I'm not the demography for those stories, because they were cool, they were definitely youth oriented or teenagers, but I like that for the good ending. But I've read some of the reviews for that book on Goodreads afterwards, and for some people, the first suffering, the part of them suffering at home or with friends, it was really too much. So I think it all depends on what somebody looks, if it's the start or the ending.
Yeah, well, I think it really depends on how we define uplifting, because I can with ease imagine a story about homophobia, about being cast out, etc., etc., that at the end it's still hopeful, that at the end it still gives us some something of being uplifted, that it gives us hope. And writing an uplifting story doesn't mean that we just keep more serious or more hard topics and motives. I've been reading a wonderful book by an Australian author, A Marvelous Light by Freya Marska, which is set in the Victorian era. And it's very historically accurate, even though it's fantasy book. So the homosexuality is still banned by the law, but it's still one of the most hopeful and uplifting book I read in months. So everything is possible.
I can mostly tell from the editor's point of view right now, I think. We didn't really know what kind of submissions we were going to get for the first edition, and we also didn't want to narrow the options for it. So it was kind of an editorial decision to take some of the texts and some not. But we also didn't get as many, even though we didn't narrow the options for the submissions, we didn't get as many of the challenging stories that we could probably. So I think we would the ones that got into the anthology were mostly really good texts, like in writing, and it was I would say I'm saying about the first edition because now we are thinking of making some other decisions about that. We didn't decide about the how it is going to look exactly yet, but the first one is I would say a pretty accurate depiction of what text we got. It's not that it's not like we selected like one kind of text like more over the more challenging or upsetting stories. So I think that's just what people needed to write and wanted to read at the moment. And judging from the text we got now, I would say it's a bit mirroring like the what's happening in the country and in the world. So I think that might be mirrored in the published piece also. But we'll think how we tackle that exactly. There are, lists. We have a list of questions and decisions that we need to have. We are waiting for the for most people to read everything yet, so to make the decision informed, and to see if we need to. Because for example, we didn't invite anyone specifically in the first edition to write things. So yes, some of the aspects of queer community were underrepresented, and we are thinking of tackling that too. So to invite specifically asexual, aromantic creators, for example, because that's what was lacking. For example, it's more thought through, I would say now. I hope it's going to be even better because of that. And I hope not actively writing about the. I wonder if our not narrowing and making the topics pretty wide actually can discourage the creators from writing the challenging stories, since it wasn't something we specifically asked for. But we'll see, I guess.
So Madalena was asking if the texts in Portugal were read by sensitive readers. So we reached out to a queer blog with several collaborators for them to get like a read squad to read through the text. So that was our approach in that sense.
So who was the we that made the anthology?
Oh, so
It wasn't.
Yeah, that's what's that's the
sorry.
info I'm lacking too. Yeah, sorry.
No, no problem, no problem. I will write in the chat room. So this is a project in Portugal to promote science fiction and fantasy, and we published several kind of books. And we were in a con, and we were talking about there's no at the time there's no queer books around in science fiction and fantasy. So we decided, if there's not, let's create it. So that was the motto to start it. So the Imaginauto project publishes several kinds of books, all kinds of themes, and then we decided to open a submission for an anthology for queer fiction. But it's changing a lot. It was one of the things also that we talked before. I feel, especially now on Disney, Netflix, wherever the film and series, there's been a lot of more and more queer characters, more and more shows that reflect queer themes, and I get a little bit divided because in one part is good because those shows are quite mainstream and everybody sees them. On the other side, I feel a little bit money grabbing, or like there's this new hype thing to explore. So let's explore it until it runs dry, the milk of the cow. What do you think about it? So, what is your opinion? Tough question, but don't get me wrong. I love seeing series with queer characters. I don't dislike it.
Yeah. I exactly get what you're talking about. There is it's hard when it's like of course it's up to some extent money grabbing, but is the queer community big enough to like make Netflix to make its a difference? I think there is more people that don't like that, actually, that there is gay people everywhere in every production, that there are people enjoying it, or at least that's what's visible on the internet and in the comments, in the like comment section of Netflix fan page, for example.
Yeah, but well, I agree that to some extent it is money grabbing because okay, Rainbow is so popular, so we used it. But still, for example, Netflix seems to me more honest at the end than, for example, Disney, which has first openly Disney character every year, and being openly gay is like one line or 1 5-second scene in a movie. And in Netflix shows we had queer narratives, real queer characters, and recently Netflix made a sequel to a great Catalan TV show that was for me it was first time in the television I see my representation, like bisexual character being main character in TV show. And I'm about to watch the sequel, but I believe I hope it's still as wonderful and as true to the queer and Catalan cultures both as it used to be.
So actually, I would challenge the idea that there is a lot of queer representation, and I was thinking about that, and I even checked the numbers, so I won't get it wrong. So the report of the AAD, sorry, that foundation that is doing reports on the queer representation in media. So for the last year, they said that there was a rise, and now there are about 12% of characters in the series. So of course, usually it comes a queer pack of characters in one series. So there is a very little number of series that are getting queer characters, and of course the problem is the type of representation, because sometimes it's just a sidekick and not a main character. But I wouldn't get to I think that we are still lacking in the queer representation, especially the intersectional representation. So I would still wait. For now, it's more money grabbing and pinkwashing, but maybe. And I hope that it would change, but I think, especially for the US content, it will go with the decline because of that bill, and don't say gay and other queer, anti-queer bills in US.
Once I was seeing a podcast, a geek podcast in Portugal, two guys talking, and they were talking about the new Superman. So there were some issues now with the son of Superman, and the son of Superman, instead of saving a girl and falling in love with the girl, he saved the boy and fell in love with the boy. And the podcast, they were really upset because saying, "Oh, they are now turning all characters gay. Leave our characters." Okay, but this is a new character, so they are not changing characters now. Okay, but I don't want to know about the sexual life of Superman. I only want to know about him killing aliens and saving the world. And say, yes, but you have hundreds of issues of Superman saving Lois Lane, the son of Superman, the wedding of Superman. You have hundreds of issues about the sexual life of Superman, but because his heterosexual life of Superman is invisible, it's the normal. And it was really difficult to talk with them and to explain that they were not seeing when the sexuality was heterosexuality. It's like completely invisible. It's not about sex. And they say, how do they explain? Oh, for example, one of the things that people are always saying, how do they explain to kids? Well, but kids know since they are 2 years old that mom and dad marry, and they know that mom and dad have a kid. Oh, but that's not about sex. So it's about what? So you can say exactly the same thing.
Yep.
with other kind of sexualities, of genders, or etc. And kids really accept it really well, because if that person can transform into an eagle, it can also transform into a woman or to a man. It's not a stretch. So do you think that this, when you pick up something very popular like superheroes, and you introduce a queer idea or a queer topic in that very popular topic, do you think is a good thing? It will change the mind of the people reading it, or do you think it's going to have the opposite effect, and that person will create more barriers to accepting these kind of narratives?
Make them mad. if you ask me. Like, considering the history of like literature and cinema and culture and everything we enjoy right now, the queer parts, the non-normative, not even queer parts, are such a small percent that even if they don't, like, if someone doesn't want to watch them, they have plenty of other works to enjoy. They're just not gonna be the newest works. So
Yeah, well, I would say that there is this saying that it's really clever actually that the constant dropping wears away a stone. So, well, even if we still have a lot of hatred and hateful comments in the internet that gays are all around now and to just stop pushing them into our culture, that, well, you won't stop the younger generation from seeing that more and more people around them say aloud that, okay, I'm gay, I'm lesbian, I'm intersexual, I'm asexual, and it makes a difference and makes change, even if it's, for us for now, small changes and really quiet ones. It still matters, at least I think so.
So the more the representation and queer characters, the more I'm happy, and that's most of the things that I care about. So if I'm happy, and if I can relate to characters, that makes me enjoy it more. So yeah, bring more of it, and I hope the numbers would get more and more just higher. So the hopefully the hateful comments will just rot away, because they wouldn't keep up with nagging at all the titles.
The Brazilians have the Brazilians. If you understand both European Portuguese and Brazilian Portuguese, Brazilian language is it's amazing. It's much more plastic and much less conservative than European Portuguese. But they have a saying, the right wing in Brazil, they have a saying, something like, if you try to be too liberal, you are not going to pay your bills. And one of the things that left me so happy is that the comic books with queer characters are selling astronomically. So there's new publics, new people buying this kind of comics with queer characters. So the saying is completely wrong, and and that's one thing that is good also, because in sort of way is art, but you can also pay with you can vote with your wallet. So when the queer community supports these kind of artworks, more artworks of this kind will appear. And for example, Arthur Naurut, I'm sorry for not saying the names correctly, was speaking about Novhut. Sorry, Novhut. Dave Chappelle got a deal for 4 new specials after being criticized for transphobia. And he's saying that there's definitely a subset of the queer community that doesn't trump the bigot. And I think that's a thing, like I was saying, it's important that the queer community to support these artworks, these novels, these anthologies, because it will promote to appear more and to be commercially viable. And if it is commercially viable, they will appear more and more and more. And I think that's important. That part also, the support.
yes, and when they are more and more visible, then the queer people are more and more visible. and then more of them can learn that there's a community and they're not alone. So I think more that the pain of the queer community that we endured in in the past lessons really, and is like goes from inside of you to the community, and in the community it's easier. So yeah, I think that the more queer stories in the public, the better, really.
Exactly. So any final comment, any final topic that we want to bring here?
No, I think that Loe summed up everything perfectly. That, well, we need to support, and you also, Carlos, that we need to simply support each other and queer narratives, and the change will come.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think more than the change will come is that we will make the change come, and that's the power of it. That's the empowering that I think is good in this kind of initiatives of creating anthologies. Is not waiting for the change to magically appear, but to provoke the change, to create the change.
Well, somebody has to, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, and I think that we generally, as queer community, when we are really stubborn and we support each other, we are able to everything.
That's a very Star Trek approach. Okay, thank you very much for this conversation. It was great to learn so much things about another culture, and let's see next year or next talks.
Yeah, thank you also so much. If I could follow up you with an email about the anthology, because I think there were some plans in the meantime made about translating some of the Portuguese works into Polish. So if we could talk about this later, then that would be great.
Okay. I will give you my email.
Yeah.
I don't know how I have to.
I think we have the emails from the
from the
organizer.
project.
Yeah.
I'm the one reading them. I'm the one that organizes the email, so it will be to me if you write.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
And
thank
you,
all,
audience.
And obrigado, Carlos.
Oh wow! I don't know how to say obrigado in Polish. Can you tell me?
Dziękuję.
Dziękuję?
Yeah, that was great.
Okay.